right, welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Glad to be back.
Today, we're going to be talking about the Watts family murders.
Oh, yeah.
Back in 2018, this case
Oh, man.
shook the nation. Chris Watts murdered his wife, Shanann,
Yeah.
and his two daughters, Bella and Celeste.
Americans on case.
Really, really sad. And we're going to be taking a look at it today. We've got some excerpts from People magazine.
Okay.
Actually, two articles from People.
Okay.
And then also the Wikipedia entry on the case.
Yeah.
And, on the surface, the Watts family
Yeah.
seemed to have it all,
Yeah, I see.
the perfect family. But
Picture perfect.
as we know now, there was
Yeah.
a very dark undercurrent.
Absolutely. It's one of those cases that just reminds you can never really know what's going on behind closed doors.
Yeah, for sure.
People put on this front, this facade of a happy family and everything's perfect. And then something like this happens and it just shatters that illusion.
Yeah, so they lived in Frederick, Colorado.
Okay.
5-bedroom home.
Wow.
Shanann was a very successful businesswoman. She worked from home,
Right.
selling a product called Thrive.
Hmm.
It was for a multi-level marketing company.
Okay.
Chris worked at Anadarko Petroleum,
Hmm.
had a steady job, and
Yeah.
they had two beautiful little girls, Bella and Celeste.
Adorable.
Shanann's Facebook page
Yeah.
was just full of photos and videos of them, portraying this very idyllic family life.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very active on social media.
Yeah, very.
Presenting this picture of
Yeah.
perfect family, perfect life. And,
Yeah, the all-American dream.
Yeah.
And
But the reality.
reality was very, very different.
Yeah. Very different. Yeah.
One of the things that we learned from the Wikipedia entry was that the Watts family had actually declared bankruptcy in 2015.
Really?
So just 3 years
Wow.
before the murders.
So, that financial stress that can really put a strain on a marriage.
Yeah, it's definitely a pressure cooker situation.
Oh, absolutely.
But as we know, it's no excuse
No, of course not.
for violence. Of course not. And things took a really dark turn when we find out from the People article that Chris Watts was having an affair with a coworker, Nicole Kessinger.
Oh.
And Shanann even texted a friend expressing her concern
Really?
about Chris's change in behavior.
Okay.
She said he wasn't touching her or talking to her the way he used to.
Wow. So she knew something was up.
Yeah, she was definitely picking up on something.
Yeah.
And then there's this one detail
Okay.
from the People article that I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
And that was that Nicole Kessinger, the mistress,
Right.
searched on the internet, did people hate Amber Frey?
Oh, wow.
And remember, Amber Frey was the mistress of Scott Peterson,
Right.
who murdered his wife, Lacey Peterson.
Yeah. Back in 2002.
Yeah.
I remember that case.
So, is that an indication that she maybe suspected something?
I mean, it definitely raises some questions.
Yeah.
Was she drawing parallels between her own situation and the Peterson case?
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely a very strange detail.
Yeah. Super creepy.
Yeah.
So let's fast forward now to August 13th, 2018.
Okay.
Shanann returns home early in the morning from a business trip.
Okay.
She was in Arizona.
Right.
She gets a ride home from her friend,
Yeah.
and then she just vanishes,
Wow. Just gone.
like
Wow.
without a trace.
So what happened?
Well, her purse, her keys, and medicine were all found inside the house,
Okay.
but her phone was tucked between the couch cushions.
Weird.
Her car was still in the garage with the girls' car seats,
Okay.
and her wedding ring was on the bedside table.
So it doesn't sound like she just ran off or something.
No, it doesn't sound like she planned to leave
Right.
at all.
Wow.
And then to make things even stranger, Chris Watts starts making all these media appearances,
Oh, wow.
pleading for his family's safe return.
Huh?
He even goes on the local news, looking distraught and desperate,
Oh, interesting.
asking for anybody with information to come forward.
Yeah, well, I mean, hindsight's 2020, right?
Yeah.
But even back then, a lot of people were kind of commenting on his demeanor during those interviews.
Yeah.
Like he seemed a little too calm,
Yeah.
a little too detached,
Right.
for a man whose entire family has supposedly vanished.
Right. Yeah, you'd think he'd be a little bit more,
Yeah, hysterical.
yeah, unhinged.
Exactly.
And then, of course, those suspicions are only heightened
Yeah.
when he fails a polygraph test.
Oh, wow.
And it's not long after that
Okay.
that he confesses to killing Shanann.
Okay. So he admits to killing his wife,
Yeah.
But
what about them?
What are the daughters?
Well, that's where things get even more complicated.
Okay.
His confession is actually full of inconsistencies.
Oh.
He initially claims that he only killed Shanann in a fit of rage after he found her.
Oh, wow.
Strangling their daughters.
Oh, my God.
That's his initial story.
So he's trying to say that his wife killed the kids, and then he killed her.
Yeah, basically blaming her for everything.
Blaming the victim.
Yeah.
And the police didn't buy that.
No, they didn't buy it at all.
No.
So before we get into
the
really gruesome details of what happened, let's just kind of set the scene a little bit.
Okay.
The bodies of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste were found on the property of Anadarko Petroleum, which is the oil and gas company where Chris Watts worked.
Right. So he worked there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Shanann was buried in a shallow grave.
Oh, my gosh.
And Bella and Celeste were found inside separate oil tanks.
Oh, my God.
And I don't know if you read this detail in the Wikipedia entry.
Yeah.
But they said that there were scratches on Bella's body that they believe came from her being pushed through the small hatch of the oil tank.
Ugh, that's awful.
So, I mean, you can only imagine the horror that poor little girl experienced in her final moments.
Awful.
So after initially trying to blame Shanann for the girls' deaths, Chris Watts eventually pleads guilty to all charges.
Wow. Yeah.
Including the unlawful termination of a pregnancy.
Yeah.
And this was on November 19, 2018.
Okay.
He was sentenced to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole.
Wow.
3 to be served consecutively for the murders of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste.
Yeah.
And 2 to be served concurrently for the other charges.
Right.
He also got an additional 84 years for the unlawful termination of the pregnancy and tampering with the bodies.
Wow.
So he's going to be spending the rest of his life behind bars.
Definitely.
And he's currently serving his sentence in a maximum security prison in Wisconsin.
Okay.
Now, fast forward to today, 5 years after the murders. Yeah.
There was a People article that came out in August of 2024 that revealed that he keeps photos of his family in his cell.
Really?
Which sparked a lot of public outrage.
I bet. Yeah.
I mean, what do you think is going through his mind?
That's a good question. I mean, is it guilt? Is it remorse? Is he trying to hold on to some kind of memory of the life that he destroyed?
Right.
Or is it all just a big act, you know? He's just trying to manipulate people into thinking that he's a changed man.
Right.
It's hard to say.
Yeah. It's really tough to say.
Yeah.
And it gets even more confusing when you learn that he also identifies as a man of God now.
Really?
And keeps a Bible in his cell.
Huh. So he's found religion.
Yeah. So is this genuine? Yeah. Or is it just a coping mechanism?
Yeah. I mean, we see this a lot with prisoners, right? They find religion in prison.
Right.
It gives them structure. It gives them purpose.
Yeah.
Maybe some forgiveness.
You know, it's hard to know if it's real or not.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something that we see a lot.
But it's not all prayers and reflection for Chris Watts.
What else is he doing?
The same People article reveals that he's been corresponding with women who are attracted to him.
Well, people are writing to him.
Yeah, they're writing to him.
I mean, I guess it's not that uncommon, you know?
Yeah.
You hear about these women who are just fascinated with notorious criminals, you know? Maybe they feel sorry for them. Maybe they think they can fix them.
Yeah.
It's a strange phenomenon.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
But it's real.
Yeah.
It definitely happens.
Yeah.
So he's got women writing to him.
Yeah.
And what else?
And he's actually spending money at the commissary on stamps and paper to write them back.
Wow. So he's actively engaging in these correspondences.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
And to top it all off, he's received 2 conduct reports while in prison.
What for?
One for unauthorized communication and transferring property.
Okay.
And another for disobeying orders and possessing contraband.
So basically he's still up to his old tricks.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
So even though he's behind bars, you know, he's still finding ways to
bend the rules.
Yeah.
Get what he wants.
Yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating.
So we've laid out the basic timeline here, some of the key players.
Right.
But now let's dig a little deeper into the investigation itself.
Okay.
What led the police to suspect Chris Watts so early on?
Well, you know, besides his weird demeanor during those interviews and the failed polygraph, there was a really crucial piece of evidence that basically blew his alibi wide open.
Okay. I'm all ears.
You remember how he told the police that he hadn't seen Shanann since early that morning when he left for work?
Right. He said he left before she got home from her trip.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, he claimed he was long gone before she even stepped foot in the house.
Right.
But there was a neighbor's security camera. And it caught Chris doing something very interesting.
Okay.
In those early morning hours after Shanann disappeared.
What was it?
He was loading a gas can into his truck.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, so that completely contradicts his story.
Right. He said he was at work.
Exactly.
But he was clearly at home.
Yeah, and loading something into his truck?
Yeah.
I mean, that's suspicious.
Yeah, very suspicious.
Yeah. So did they confront him with this right away?
They did, yeah. And he still continued to deny any involvement in Shanann's disappearance.
So even when they had him dead to rights on camera, he was still sticking to his story.
Yeah, he was trying to hold on.
Wow.
But the evidence was mounting against him.
Yeah.
You know, the police were closing in.
Right.
And it was only after hours and hours of interrogation that he finally broke down.
Wow.
And confessed to killing Shanann.
So he admitted to killing her, but still nothing about the girls.
Well, not right away.
Okay.
But as we discussed earlier, his initial confession was riddled with all these inconsistencies. Particularly that whole part about trying to blame Shanann.
Right. Yeah, trying to pin it on her.
Yeah.
Saying she had killed the kids.
Yeah.
And that's why he snapped.
Right.
But the evidence didn't add up.
No, not at all.
No.
And honestly, a lot of people saw that as a really cowardly act.
Oh, yeah.
You know, just a final attempt to smear her reputation.
Even in death.
Yeah, even in death.
Wow.
It was awful.
Yeah.
So after he confesses to killing Shanann, does he immediately tell them where the bodies are?
I mean, you would think.
You would think.
Right.
But no.
No, he doesn't.
What does he do?
He initially tries to lead them to a remote oil work site, claiming that he disposed of their bodies there.
Okay.
But it was a lie.
Of course it was.
Of course it was.
Yeah.
Investigators quickly realize his story's not adding up.
Right.
They press him further.
Okay.
And eventually he breaks down, reveals the real location of the bodies.
Where were they?
On the property of the oil company where he worked.
Wow.
Which is where they found Shanann.
Yeah.
Buried in that shallow grave.
Right.
And the girls' bodies.
Yeah.
In those oil tanks.
Awful.
It's just horrific to think about what those little girls went through in their final moments.
Yeah, you mentioned the scratches on Bella's body.
Right.
That's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, it suggests that she was fighting back.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that she was trying to get away.
Awful, awful.
Yeah, just unimaginable.
So he's arrested. His confession leads them to the bodies.
Right.
What happens next? I mean, how does the public react to this?
Well, I mean, this case dominated the news cycle.
Yeah, I bet.
For weeks.
Yeah.
People were just horrified by the nature of the crime.
And disgusted by Chris Watts' betrayal.
I mean, he went from being this grieving husband on TV to public enemy number one.
Yeah, pretty much overnight.
Yeah, wow.
So with all the evidence stacked against him, what was his legal strategy?
Yeah.
You know, did he try to plead insanity or claim some kind of diminished capacity?
You think he would have tried something like that?
You would think so.
Yeah.
But he didn't.
Right.
He actually accepted a plea deal.
Wow.
Pleading guilty to all 9 charges against him.
Wow.
Including the unlawful termination of Shanann's pregnancy.
Yeah.
So he didn't even try to fight the charges.
So why do you think he did that?
Well, the evidence was overwhelming.
Yeah.
The prosecution was seeking the death penalty.
Right.
So his lawyers probably advised him that this was the best option.
To save his own life.
Yeah, to avoid execution.
Wow.
And Shanann's family supported the plea deal.
Okay.
They didn't want any more death. Suffering.
Right.
So they agreed to take the death penalty off the table.
Okay.
In exchange for the guilty plea.
Yeah. So that must have been an incredibly difficult decision for them.
I can't even imagine what they went through.
But, you know, it also speaks to their strength.
Yeah.
And their compassion.
Yeah.
That they were willing to prioritize healing and closure over revenge.
So with the guilty plea entered, what was the final outcome?
Of this sentencing.
As we mentioned earlier, on November 19, 2018, he was sentenced to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole.
Right.
And he's essentially going to spend the rest of his life behind bars.
In prison.
And sources who have spoken to people in the prison have said
okay.
that he's considered an outcast even among criminals.
Wow.
The fact that he murdered his own children makes him a target in the prison hierarchy. Oh. So he's basically living in solitary confinement.
Wow.
By choice.
By choice, because he doesn't want to be around the other inmates.
Yeah, he's afraid for his life.
Wow, that's intense.
So how does he spend his days?
Yeah, what does he do all day?
Well, according to the Department of Corrections, he works as a custodian.
Okay, so he's got a job.
Yeah, he's got a job to keep him busy.
Yeah. Otherwise, he'd just be sitting there with his thoughts.
Right.
Which I can only imagine are pretty dark.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So we've covered a lot of ground here today.
Yeah, we've talked about the murders, the investigation, the trial, Chris Watts' life in prison.
Right.
But there's still this big question looming over this whole case.
The big why.
Yeah. Why did he do it?
What could possibly drive a person to kill their entire family?
It's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it's one that we're going to try to answer.
Yeah, we're going to delve into that in our next segment.
Okay, great.
So stay tuned.
It really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And sadly, there's no easy answer.
Right.
But, criminologists, psychologists, they've looked at these kinds of cases.
Yeah.
And there are some factors they consider when they're trying to understand these types of crimes.
Okay, so what are some of the possible explanations for, why Chris Watts would do something like this?
Well, one theory is that, he was just overwhelmed by all the pressure in his life. Financial strain from that bankruptcy we talked about.
Right.
The demands of his job, a new baby on the way.
Yeah.
It's possible he just felt trapped.
Right.
And desperate.
Yeah.
And murder, as crazy as it sounds, might have seemed like a way out.
Yeah, twisted solution.
Yeah, a way to escape all his problems.
But that obviously doesn't excuse his actions.
No, of course not.
In anywhere.
No, it's one way to try and understand, his state of mind at the time.
Are there any other potential explanations?
Oh, another theory focuses on the affair with Nicole Kessinger.
Right.
Some people believe that played a much bigger role than Chris Watts initially let on.
Okay.
It's possible he was so infatuated with her that he just saw his family as an obstacle to starting a new life with Nicole.
So he killed them to be with his mistress.
It's a possibility, in his confession.
Yeah.
He did admit to telling Shanann that he wanted a separation.
Right.
And that they argued about it.
Right.
Before he killed her.
So maybe he just snapped and decided to eliminate his family instead of going through a messy divorce?
Could be, but, you also have to remember.
Yeah.
He planned and carried out the murders of his daughters, too.
That's true.
Belle and Celeste. I mean, that suggests premeditation.
Right.
It wasn't just a crime of passion in the heat of the moment.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
So was there any evidence that Chris Watts had a history of violence?
That's the thing.
Yeah.
According to the investigators, there were no reports of domestic violence.
Wow.
No red flags in his past.
Really?
No criminal record.
He's like a totally normal guy.
It seemed like it, yeah.
So this was completely out of character.
As far as anybody knew, yeah.
It's terrifying to think that someone could be living a double life like that.
I know, it's disturbing.
Hiding that kind of darkness.
Yeah, it really highlights how little we can sometimes know about the people around us.
Okay, so we've talked about some possible motivations for the murders, but there's one element that I think we should address.
Okay, what's that?
The fact that Chris Watts initially tried to blame Shanann for the girls' deaths.
Oh, yeah, that was a particularly disturbing aspect of his confession.
Right. He claimed that he found Shanann strangling Celeste.
Right.
And that Bella was already dead.
Yeah.
And then he flew into a rage and strangled Shanann.
Trying to make it look like she was the monster.
Yeah.
And he was just,
protecting the kids.
Yeah, protecting the kids.
But, as we said, the police didn't believe his story.
No.
The evidence just didn't support it.
Nope.
And a lot of people saw that as a very cowardly act.
Oh, yeah.
A final attempt to tarnish Shanann's reputation.
Even in death.
Even in death.
It's just awful.
Yeah, just add another layer of cruelty to this whole horrific situation.
An already unimaginable tragedy.
So we've gone over some possible motivations.
Yeah.
But I'm still stuck on some of Chris Watts' behavior.
Yeah, what do you mean?
Like, why keep photos of his family in his cell?
Oh, yeah. Especially after all the public outrage.
Right. And the petition to remove them.
Yeah.
Why would he want to hold on to those?
Well, some experts think it's a sign of remorse.
Okay.
A way for him to try and deal with what he did by holding on to the memory of the family he destroyed.
But is that possible?
What do you mean?
To feel real remorse after doing something so horrible?
I mean, that's a tough question.
Right.
Guilt and remorse are complicated.
Yeah.
Maybe keeping the photos is his way of trying to confront his actions.
Okay.
Acknowledge the pain he caused.
But then there's the whole man of God thing.
Right.
He's found religion in prison, keeps a Bible in his cell.
Yeah, that's right.
Is that genuine?
It's hard to know.
Yeah.
It could be a way to cope with the guilt,
Mm-hmm.
find some kind of forgiveness.
Right.
But it could also be a way to deflect blame.
Right.
Present himself as a changed man.
So we're basically left to speculate.
I think so, yeah.
About his true motives.
I mean, we can analyze the evidence.
Yeah.
Explore the psychological theories.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, we'll never really know
Yeah.
what was going on in his head,
Right.
why he did what he did.
It's what makes this case so fascinating and so disturbing.
Absolutely.
It uses us to confront the dark side of human nature and realize that even seemingly ordinary people are capable of unimaginable evil.
It's a sobering thought.
It is. So what do you think are the most important takeaways from this case?
I think the biggest takeaway is that we need to be aware and vigilant, in our own lives.
Yeah.
And in the lives of those around us.
Yeah.
Domestic violence can happen anywhere.
That's true.
Even in families that seem perfect from the outside.
That's right.
So we need to pay attention to red flags.
Yeah.
Trust our instincts.
Yeah.
Speak up if we think something's wrong.
It's easy to get caught up in the illusion of perfection.
Yeah, especially with social media these days.
Right. Everybody's presenting their best selves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Everyone's got their struggles.
Right.
Everyone's got their demons.
Right.
But we don't always see that.
This case also highlights the importance of open communication.
Absolutely.
Creating safe spaces where people can talk about their problems.
Yes, definitely.
Ask for help.
Yeah.
Okay, so awareness communication, recognizing that things aren't always what they seem. Those are some key takeaways. But what about Chris Watts himself?
What about him?
What can we learn from his behavior and his motivations?
I think his case forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth.
What's that?
The evil can hide in plain sight.
Yeah.
I mean, he wasn't some monster from a horror movie.
Right.
He was a regular guy.
Yeah.
He lived among us, worked with us.
Right.
Had friends and family.
Right. A seemingly normal life.
And yet, he was capable of this horrific act.
It makes you wonder, how well can we ever really know someone?
Yeah, that's a question that's been around for centuries.
Right.
And this case doesn't really give us any answers.
So what's the final thought you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the Watts case shows us that appearances can be deceiving.
Yeah.
And that evil can wear many masks.
That's a good way to put it.
So be kind, be aware,
yeah,
and never underestimate the power of human connection.
Really good advice. I think that's a great place to wrap up this part of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it really does make you think, how well can we ever really know someone?
Right. Like you said, he had this whole other persona that he presented to the world.
Right. And it all turned out to be a lie.
A carefully constructed facade.
Yeah. And it makes those unsettling aspects of his behavior after the conviction even harder to grasp.
Right. You mean like the photos in his cell?
Exactly. The photos, the sudden religious devotion.
And the letters from women?
Yeah. I mean, how do we even begin to make sense of all that?
Well, I think it's tempting to try and oversimplify things,
Okay.
Like say he's either totally remorseful.
Right.
Or he's just a master manipulator.
Right, one or the other.
But the truth is probably somewhere in between.
Yeah.
It's messy.
Yeah.
The human psyche is complicated.
Right.
It's possible to feel genuine guilt and regret
and
still be capable of manipulation.
So are we just left with more questions than answers?
In a way, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, we can analyze all the evidence we want.
Right.
We can look at the psychology, but we'll never really know for sure what was going on in his mind.
Right.
Why he did what he did.
And that's what's so disturbing about it.
Absolutely. It reminds us that there are limits to our understanding of human nature.
Yeah.
That sometimes evil is just unexplainable.
Well, for our listeners who have been with us on this deep dive, I think it's safe to say the world is not always what it seems.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
You see these perfect families on social media.
Right. The highlight reels.
But you never really know what's going on behind the scenes.
So what's the final thought you want to leave everyone with today?
I think the Watts case is a reminder that appearances can be deceiving.
Yeah.
That evil can hide in plain sight.
Yeah.
So be kind, be aware, and never underestimate the power of genuine human connection.
Those are great words to live by, and I think that's a perfect place to wrap up our deep dive today.
Yeah, I agree.
Into the Watts family murders. If you're interested in learning more, there are tons of resources available online.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Court documents, letters from Chris Watts himself, even interrogation tapes.
But be warned, it's a deep dive into the dark side of humanity.
It is so. Until next time, folks, be safe out there.
And be good to each other.